Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friends Stilgar and sometimes Great Pharaoh take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and often hasn't heard about. Today, however, we are going to be welcoming a new member, a new contributor. His name is Resolve, and he has his own channel called A New Resolve, which is linked to our page. So with that introduction being made, I'm going to go ahead and give it over to Resolve and let him go ahead. So go ahead with your topic.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So Ivor and I were talking a few days ago, and somehow or another, we started to talk about, at the very end of our conversation, it's interesting how that works. Like sometimes something at the very end is meant to be, but somehow or another, we brought up the topic of Ethiopian presence in Jerusalem and how there's actually an Ethiopian Orthodox monastery on the roof of the Holy Sepulchre and also above the chapel of St. Helen. And I'm like, that would be something interesting to look up, for the topic of a video. And so I tried to do some research. And as I was doing the research, I'll admit to you, I'm not that versed when it comes to history. And as I was looking into it, there's a lot that has gone on in history when it comes to like just the history of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in itself. And I originally wanted to just look up a little bit of context, I'm sure maybe anyone who listens to this will already know full well about what the Holy Sepulchre is and so on and so forth, but there are a lot of people that don't. And I've been a Christian for 15 years, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't really know any of this history. I've never, to my fault, I've never taken the time out to learn this. And I was kind of shocked at what I learned. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and just invasions that have happened in Jerusalem, deconstruction, construction, renovations, outside influence, and then gradually kind of transition into the Ethiopian presence there, both Christian and then eventually Ethiopian Jewish presence. So if anyone isn't familiar, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is actually, it's more than one church. I think you could maybe call it a compound if you've ever been there, if you could see photos of it. That's built on the traditional site of the Lord Jesus Christ's crucifixion and burial. And it was built by Emperor Constantine. He ordered its construction in 326 AD, which is the 4th century. And I found it interesting that when Constantine wanted to build it, there was actually already a number of pagan temples in Jerusalem at that time. And to my surprise, one of them was actually built over the tomb of Christ. So I decided to look into that. How did that come to be? So it turns out there was a Roman emperor, do you guys know, is his name pronounced Hadrian or Hadrian? You ever heard of him?
I always say Hadrian.
Okay, Hadrian.
Maybe in the comments somebody will say otherwise. We'll see. Yeah,
feel free if anyone knows. But the Roman Emperor Hadrian, around 30 years after the death of the Apostle John, he actually renamed the city, calling it Aelia Capitolina, if that's how it's pronounced. The word Aelia, it's A-E-L-I-A, is derived from the emperor's family name, Aelius. And if this is pronounced this way, Capitolina refers to the cult of the Capitoline triad, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. So a little bit of context, in 130 AD, and just keep in mind like how close this is to the apostles. Like I looked up the date when the Apostle John, who was at the foot of Christ when Christ was being crucified, He passed away in 99 AD, so this is not long after that. When the Roman Emperor Hadrian visited Jerusalem, it was still devastated from the First Roman-Jewish War of 66 to 73 AD. And I don't know exactly how that played out, but maybe he was on a tour or a trip or doing what he was doing, and he just decided to come into Jerusalem and just take over for himself. What he did was he built a few temples there, like pagan temples. One of them was for Aphrodite, if that's how it's pronounced.
I think so.
Yeah, and that was the one that was over the tomb of Christ. Another one for Venus. I can't remember. Aphrodite has another name for that is mentioned. One for Jupiter on the site of the Temple Mount, surprisingly enough, and then a few others. And he built those actually intentionally on Christian holy sites. So he knew when he came there that those were Christian holy sites. And I'm assuming that the only way he would know that is if there were actually Christians who were alive, that would make that distinction, or Christian symbols. Some background as far as who the Emperor Hadrian was. So he loved orgies. He was deeply involved in witchcraft and the occult. He had many people enslaved, killed, and tormented. So he was not a good guy. And this was crazy to see too. So a few years after Hadrian's visit to Jerusalem, there was actually a false Christ. Some articles said his name was Simon, some Simeon, but someone named Simon Bar Kosiba was actually believed to be the Messiah. And a prominent rabbi at the time named Akiva ben Yosef actually agreed to this. I don't know to what degree he played a role in like proclaiming that this guy is the Messiah, but they thought that this guy, Simon or Simeon Bar Kosiba, was Christ at the time. Obviously, thankfully, the Christians didn't agree with this, but at least some of the Jews did. Well, fast forward to the time of Constantine, when they were removing these pagan temples, Constantine's workers actually found Christian graffiti on the foundation of the temples. So you can imagine, however that played out in history, the Christians were probably really angry, and they didn't have spray paint, but wrote what they did on it. Are you guys familiar with any of that history?
I know a little bit about Hadrian. I didn't know all this.
Yeah, it's just like all of that right after, so early on in Christian history. I was like, wow, like I wasn't expecting that, to be honest.
I think Nero was the first emperor to begin the persecution of Christians.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. As soon as it started,
I visited Hadrian's Wall in northern England last year.
Really
cool. Yeah.
Do you have any pictures of it?
I do.
Let's put them in the
I didn't know he ever went to Jerusalem. So
yeah, that wasn't.
I didn't know he was into like orgies and stuff either. I knew he liked big walls. So he was trying to consolidate the empire because he knew there was they weren't able to expand it any further.
The Picts were quite a nuisance for them, actually. The Picts.
Yeah.
And the whole occupation of southern, today we would call it England and Wales, but the whole occupation of Great Britain was a big drain on the money. Like it was a net negative for them to be there. They just lost money to occupy that place.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's okay. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, after that, from the research that I did, the next, I'm sure stuff happened before that, hundreds of years, but the next notable, unfortunate situation, for lack of a better word, that happened in Jerusalem was in 614 AD. The Sasanian, which is actually a dynasty in Persia, the Sasanian Empire, overtook Jerusalem, and they actually, with the Holy Sepulchre itself, specifically, they burned it with fire. And there's a man named Gideon Avni. He's a director of at least was at some point the director of the excavations and surveys department of the Israeli authorities, Antiquity Authority. He said in an article that The Persian conquest of Palestine in 614 AD is described in historical sources as a most violent military raid that dramatically affected the political and administrative stability of Byzantine Palestine, involving large-scale damage to churches and a mass killing of the local Christian population. And I looked into how many Christians died. 90,000 Christians were killed by Persians who were coming into Jerusalem.
Crazy.
Yeah, and that only lasted, well, quote unquote only, right? Lasted 14 years. So even though 14 years is a short amount of time, if you're going to look at, the entire history of Palestine, that same man, that director, said in the article that it's the effects from that Persian influence changed the urban and rural landscape for so many years to come. And this is really interesting. So there's a Christian saint named Saint Modestus. He was actually the abbot of the monastery of Theodosius in Palestine in those days. Before he was the abbot of the monastery in Palestine, he was actually a monk on Mount Sinai. So he was an abbot during that time. Well, with the help of the Patriarch of Alexandria in Egypt, his name was Saint John the Merciful. He actually, I don't know how this played out, but somehow he helped restore the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So again, like 90,000 Christians are being killed, but somehow or another, this Saint Modestus, who was in his latter years, he was appointed the Archbishop of Jerusalem at the time. Oh, this is important too. So when the Persians invaded, the head of the Christian head of Jerusalem before Saint Modestus was actually Patriarch Zacharias. So during that 14-year Persian, I guess you could call it conquest or invasion, the Patriarch Zacharias, this is crazy, and even the cross of Christ, the true cross itself, were taken to Persia. And the Patriarch Zacharias and the cross were in Persia for 14 years. All of the miracles are not written down. I couldn't find them all, but many miracles actually occurred in Persia, to the point where even, not to a great degree, but Persians actually converted to Christianity. And it's said that even, quote, the Christian God came to Persia. At the end of that 14-year reign, or 14, you can't call it a reign, but that 14-year, Persian presence in Jerusalem, I'm assuming it was because of the miracles that were happening. I don't know, maybe idols were falling down, maybe it was stuff that was hurting the Persians, so they decided to let them go. But the Emperor Heraclius, I think he said he was a Roman emperor or Byzantine emperor. He defeated the Persians at Nineveh at the end of this 14-year period, and after that defeat, the Persian king, he gave in and decided to let the Patriarch Zacharias go free, along with the captives that were there and the cross itself. I thought that was really, really interesting. And in the meantime, again, I don't know how this happened, because you would think that, right, you would think that Saint Modestus, who was taking the place of Patriarch Zacharias, would have been captured too. I didn't find those details, but while Patriarch Zacharias was, and some of the Christians and the cross were captive in Persia, Modestus helped rebuild the Holy Sepulchre specifically, because this is kind of what I'm trying to do this talk on and base this around, with the help of the Patriarch of Alexandria in Egypt financially. Does that make sense? Kind of going around there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, the Emperor Heraclius, he did recover the territories, the eastern provinces that the Persians took.
Yeah.
Of course, it unfortunately didn't last very long. I mean, maybe you'll discuss it, but this war was the last of the Persian-Byzantine wars, because it weakened both empires so much that the Muslims were able to overrun so they overran like all of the Persian Empire and most of the Byzantine holdings in the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah, I saw that. And it's so Modestus, this man who, was a monk on Sinai, then the abbot of the monastery in Palestine, he actually was born in Cappadocia in Asia Minor. So I love seeing when different figures in early Christian history come from places mentioned in the Bible, because it's like, wow, like life didn't stop when the Bible stopped being written, right? It's like, just because Revelation, the page ends and that you close the book, the, people still lived in history, so
Yep.
I mean, this is just one of how many figures who were born and lived in the same places that we read about in the Bible, and we know their names and we have many of their writings. And actually, the head of Saint Modestus is located today in the Athonite monastery on Mount Athos of Simona Petra, like as with many other relics, of saints. So I thought that was really
His
interesting.
head is still there,
Yeah, and
like
the yeah.
in a box.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a very, very decorative and probably in gold, gold head, and the
Doesn't
monastery of
somebody?
Simona Petra.
I'm sorry, but
No, it's okay.
speaking of this, doesn't the Coptic Church have the head of John the Baptist, like his actual head?
Yes, and there's a documentary that you can. So, the man who made the documentary, I actually emailed him, and a long time ago, like this was my mindset. A long time ago, I saw his documentary on YouTube, and then I looked in the comments. The man who filmed it and did everything, he put in a comment, "Hey, like, please don't upload my documentary to YouTube. I want it to be paid for." So I saw his name, and at the credits, I watched the whole thing first, and then I realized, oh, he's trying to let the person who uploaded it know, I don't want this for free on YouTube. And he's actually French, I think. So I actually emailed him and I told him, I was like, hey, I'm sorry for them uploading it without your permission. And he was like, because you told me that, I'm going to give it to you for free. So he actually gave me, I don't have it anymore because he basically let me rent it for free, but he actually sent me like a file of that documentary. So it's, what's the name of it? Well, I'm going to take a note that we can for sure put that in the description below. It's kind of tricky, right? Because the only way you can really, if you were to pay for this sorry, I haven't got to the point about what's in the documentary, but so basically this French, I don't know if he's an historian or whoever he is, he did a documentary about the desert of Egypt and the Christians there in the Coptic Church. And well, what monastery is it? It's the Saint Macarius the Great Monastery has within it not only the head of Saint John the Baptist, but like the entire relics of the body of Elisha the prophet, not Elijah, but Elisha's disciple Elisha, who in the Old Testament, there was a miracle with his body. Remember, I think it was a guy fell into the pit where he was, and he
They
came back
tossed
alive.
a guy who was recently deceased into the tomb where his skeleton was, and he came back to
Yeah,
life. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that same.
the bald guy. I always get them confused a lot because their names are so similar in English. But
Yeah, Elisha is the one who grabbed onto. He asked for a portion of Elijah's spirit.
double portion.
Yeah, double portion. So you will see if you watch that documentary. Saint Macarius the Great is a desert church father from the early centuries, and he actually has a cave that's buried like in somewhere in the deserts of Egypt that goes like way down in there. And if I'm not mistaken, it was in that cave where they found it. It may have been under the ground in the monastery. But what I was gonna say was, it's kind of like like you know the man says that he in the comment, it makes the comment might still be there, that he doesn't want people to watch this documentary that someone uploaded for free. But how else is this knowledge going to get out there? Because if you go to the website, it's like, from what I can remember, it's only in French and it's like unavailable to even buy. So I think it's probably safe to say people could go watch it. But anyway, that was my mindset back then. I didn't want to like break the rules. I didn't want to watch it. But that's how I ended up finding out about that. And there's actually maybe we could put this in the description too, or at least a photo of this as I'm talking, but there's a book that you can buy on that history. It's called, the title is something along the lines of The Discovery of the Relics of St. John the Baptist and Elisha the Prophet at the St. Macarius the Great Monastery in Egypt. And it's a little book, maybe 15 pages, and it tells you like the entire history of where their bodies were, because obviously when St. John the Baptist died, like right away, he didn't go straight to Egypt. I can't remember exactly what that history was, but it documents from where, I don't remember where, but from where St. John's body and Elisha's body were before that, all the way up until how they got to the St. Macarius the Great Monastery. And it's like, man, that kind of knowledge, you don't hear that kind of knowledge every day, right?
I think coming to John the Baptist, I think his head ended up in a different place from the rest of his body.
Okay, it's either, yeah, I think I spoke too soon. I don't know if it's his head specifically in Egypt, but some of his body's there for sure. Yeah.
Somebody, I know there's a head. Oh man, I'm gonna have to find out. All right, let's look at it. Let's look it up later.
Yeah,
we'll just put it in the slideshow as a note.
Yeah, sure. So that that was a 14-year period in the 7th century, in the 600s. So then the Holy Sepulchre was damaged in 808 by an earthquake. In the mid 900s, 10th century, Muslims occupying Jerusalem converted the basilica into a mosque. And then in 1009 AD, what remained of the church was completely destroyed by the Muslim caliphate, or Caliph al-Hakim. And al-Hakim, and you going to say something? Or?
Oh, I think this is the same guy that forced the Egyptians to all speak Arabic. That said, if you speak in your language, I hear you speaking your language, I'll cut your tongue out. I think this is the guy. This is the main villain for the Arabization of Egypt.
Wow, I wouldn't be surprised, because what I was about to say was he's known for cruelty towards Christian, Jews, and even Sunni Muslims. So, yeah, I mean that's insane. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Fast forward a few decades, in 1048, the Byzantines helped rebuild it, although it wasn't the same as before, and at this point, I mean, that's 1,000 years from the time of Christ. I mean, how many different, and these are just the ones I'm mentioning. It got me thinking, I'm going to mention this a little bit later, but when it comes to the Ethiopians specifically, but I mean, God only knows how many documents we could have had if how many documents have been burned, just the Library of Alexandria, for example. There's probably so much more that we could know that we don't. It's as far as details in between the lines.
Yeah, they destroyed a lot of irreplaceable, priceless stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. And then in the time of the Crusaders, the Crusades, at the end of the 11th century to the mid 13th, there were renovations. And help from them. So let me see. Yeah, and renovation and help from them. I didn't look too deep into that because I didn't want to get too far off topic. I mean, that's a whole other conversation as far as the Crusades. But what I read was from the early 1500s to the early 1900s, there was Ottoman rule in Jerusalem. Do you know anything about that? You familiar with Ottoman rule?
I'm familiar with the Ottomans. Not a fan. Yeah. But I don't know much about how they administered the Holy Land compared with how the Arabs ministered it.
Okay, yeah, I saw that they were there for 400 years, but
400 years. Wow, I knew they ruled it, but I didn't know it was for that long. Yeah, I know that's also why Erdogan is so involved, or he's very much, anyway, the leader of Turkey right now. He's very much interested as well in Israel. So
yeah, and again, I'm sure maybe someone hearing this could inform us in the comments about about particular specifics. I'm not sure. I didn't look into the specifics of like, you know, how every year, how every decade was within those 400 years. Cause I think it's worth noting that, surely I don't think that they were like totally free to do whatever they wanted, but Christian worship wasn't like eradicated during that time either, which is kind of, I mean, which is a blessing, but it's kind of interesting.
So what I know about the Ottomans is they had this thing called the Janissary program. And the purpose of the Janissary program was to have a slave army, an army of slave soldiers. And according to Islam, you cannot enslave a Muslim. So what they would do is they would, but if they convert to Islam after becoming a slave, you don't have to let them go. You can keep them as a slave. So what they used to do is, and I know they did this in Greece, they would take the children of Christians and like away from their parents when they're kids. They put them in this army and train them and force convert them to Islam so that they could get around this technicality. It's something that as a parent would be one of my greatest nightmares, which, you know, but I don't know. So Greece was like mostly Christian, you know, but I don't know what kind of Christian presence was still in the area that I guess today we would call Israel, during the time that these people were, by the time the Ottomans get there. I heard the Ottomans were a little bit more tolerant religiously than the Arabs were. But I also heard they were more clever, and when they decided to torture people, they were more innovative.
So, oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to being more tolerant, so there's something called I don't want to get too into it because it's a whole conversation in itself, but there is something called the status quo. Have you guys heard about that in the Holy Land? You heard of the status quo? Do you know what that is?
I don't.
It sounds familiar, but not really.
Yeah, so yeah. it was a like a type of legal agreement that, maybe there's a better way to put that, but like a legal agreement that was put in place regarding the holy sites, like of the Holy Land, to maintain like whoever was already in charge, to prevent conflict. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually who started this status quo was someone who wasn't a Christian. So yeah, I apologize for not being the most knowledgeable on that, but that it goes to show that it's a reflection of what you said, that there was some tolerance there, because the person who created that agreement for the holy sites in Jerusalem did that to keep peace, which would mean that whoever was already there could stay there. But again, I don't know what happened. It's crazy because, I mean, you think about when it comes to the Persians killing 90,000 people in Jerusalem, or in that surrounding land within 14 years, right? That's insane. And if like you and I, if we're living in a 14-year period, I mean, like I said earlier, I've been a Christian now for 15 years. That's a long time. Like looking on a piece of paper on a history book, I was like, oh, 15 years, what's that? If you're living that, that's an enormous amount of time, you know? I mean, so who knows? I mean, all of the day-by-day details and the little periods in between all this stuff that we don't even know about it. I think that's important to remember when it comes to history. You know what I mean? There's way more, not to say that what's written down is fake, of course not, but there's a lot more as well that we just don't read about, you know?
Oh yeah.
So basically that's really where I wanted to conclude at when it comes to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You know, it's the most holy place for Christians around the world. It's the place where Christ was both crucified and buried. Of course, Bethlehem is nearby. Within that compound, or the because the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one particular church, but connected to it are different chapels and other churches. Over 1 million people visit that every year. There are Egyptians there, Copts, Copts, Coptic Christians. There are Ethiopians. There are Greeks. There are Armenians. There are Syrians, Jacobites, and they've been there for a long time, you know. But just to give a little background as far as like what the Holy Sepulchre is. So at the same time, right, there just happens to be these Ethiopians on the roof. It's like, how did they get there? So if anyone's not already familiar, there are two different accounts that really tell us how Ethiopians got to the Holy Land. So the first one is very old. It goes back to 1,000 years before the time of Christ, with the meeting of King Solomon, you know, the son of David, and the Queen of Sheba, and that's in 1 Kings chapter 10 in the Old Testament. Coupled with the Kebra Nagast, which is an ancient Ethiopian book. It's the Glory of Kings. It tells the story of King Solomon having a son with the Queen of Sheba. There's an Ethiopian professor who pointed out that it's possible the Queen of Sheba, of course, this isn't written in the scripture, like a lot of things aren't written in the scripture, right? Like a lot of things that Christ did, we actually don't know about, but it's possible that the Queen of Sheba could have been given land by King Solomon. I mean, maybe not, but you know, for Ethiopians, the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia traces their bloodline. The royal family traces their bloodline back to that union. That's one account that people will look to and say that, you know, that's a connection to how Ethiopians first started to have a presence in Ethiopia, or in Jerusalem. Sorry, and the other one, which many people know. More people know, is the account of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8. You guys know that one, right?
Yeah, I think that is. So I don't like. I'm not trying to. I don't know what you're getting ready to say about that one, but the Ethiopian eunuch in the New Testament is not Ethiopian. He's actually a Nubian. He's a Cushite. In the Old Testament, when it says Ethiopia, in the Old Testament, when it says Cush, that's a reference to the Nubians, the historical enemy culture just to the south of Egypt. And in the New Testament, because it was written in Greek, they refer to them as Ethiopians because the Greeks used the term Ethiopian as a catch-all term to refer to sub-Saharan Africans regardless of their ethnicity. So how do I know? Because he says in the Bible, it says he works for Candace, right? The queen. Well, the Nubians, that's actually not her name. It's a title. It's Candake for the Nubian queen mother. So that those people are not the same as the people that we call Ethiopians today. That would be in Sudan, actually.
Okay, well, if that's true, then it's good you pointed out. It's not a disappointment to me. I mean, the fact that you pointed it out, like sometimes people pose questions, whether in this regard or in other regards, in order for something to come to the surface, in order for it to be addressed. So it's interesting you say that, because all over the internet, man, on Ethiopian websites, they will mention this, which is interesting. On like current day, like Abyssinian Ethiopians, they will say that. So, but anyway. So what I was going to say, and again, this is what I'm going to say is still accurate. People will still look to this account, right? He was the Ethiopian or Cushite eunuch, was the treasurer of Candace, you know, and he came to worship, and he had with him the book of Isaiah. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If like in the case that it was right, he came to worship, and then it's interesting because. Well, now that you say that, it's like, well, okay, then now should it even be mentioned, right? So, but anyway, let's just even if you scratch that, right? King Izana in the 4th century, the 300s, that was when Christianity officially became, or Ethiopia officially became a Christian country, and so even past those two accounts, I tried to look into still, regardless, the origin of. Just to be specific, Abyssinian, Ethiopian, Horn of Africa presence in Jerusalem. And I kind of had a problem because, so from an Ethiopian professor named, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Neguse Ayel. There's an article on Google, and it's called. Okay, there's a long article. It's packed with information. You can look it up. It's called Deir Sultan, which is the name of the monastery on top of the Holy Sepulchre. Deir Sultan, Ethiopia, and the Black World. And the man who wrote this is an Ethiopian professor. I don't know if he's still there, but he at least was a professor at UCLA, and he's also an author. He says a lot in this article, and I was kind of, in trying to do this research, I was kind of having trouble because he would say things, and then when I would go try and like fact check him, not that I thought he was just telling a complete lie, but I couldn't find the things that he was referring to. So I read online that St. John Chrysostom of the 4th century says in one of his homilies that there were Ethiopians in Jerusalem at the time of Pentecost. That was referenced. But then when I go to look up that on Google, there's like nowadays, it's pretty recent. We have AI overview where you can Google search a question and there's an AI overview. If you click on the drop down button, below the AI overview will give you, the different websites that the AI overview got the information from. And there's nothing there. I'm like, wait a minute. And then there's another reference of Saint Jerome, who also lived in the 4th century in the 300s AD. And in this article, it says that Ethiopians were mentioned of living in Jerusalem at that time. But again, the same thing. I couldn't find any further reference. So I don't want to think that these things aren't true. And I personally believe that I would not be surprised at all that Ethiopians, like modern day, current day Ethiopians, Abyssinians in the Horn of Africa, that they were there. I think that they were there, but it's hard to find. If anybody has any links, feel free to leave in the comment. But I couldn't really find a lot of ancient sources. Like they more come around later on in history. There's a lot as far as the 1800s and the 1900s, but early centuries, it's kind of hard. And I don't know if this, because obviously English is not the only language, right? The English libraries are not the only libraries. There's a whole, I have no idea what's within it, right? But there's a whole Ethiopian library that I don't think all three of us, we were not able to read, right? So
yeah.
Maybe this professor had his own resources that he was learning from, right? Because obviously the best people to learn about Ethiopian history would be from Ethiopians themselves. Maybe they have Ethiopian books that just haven't been translated to English. Because I don't think that he was writing this article with malice, right, or to deceive people. But yeah, I was kind of having a hard time, but. And I think this is good to tell people, right? To even at the very least to get the conversation going, right? If anyone else is interested to do their research on Ethiopian presence in Jerusalem, within that same article, again, this is another thing that I tried to look further into and I couldn't find it. But that Ethiopian professor said that a Muslim leader in a caliphate, his name is Umar, and something called his what is it called, his firman or a directive, it's called Umar's agreement. Apparently he confirmed Ethiopian presence in Jerusalem in the 7th century, but I couldn't find it outside of the article where he references. I looked up Umar's agreement on Google, I looked up his firman, his directive, the different names to find this Islamic document, because I don't know what this is called, right, but if you go to an article on your phone and you go down to the drop bar, or maybe it's on the top, and you click that, like it may be on the left, where you can like search throughout the article that you're reading. If you type in a word, and it'll tell you how many times that word is in the article. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like a word
function.
search. Yeah. I couldn't. I looked up Ethiopia in each of these documents, couldn't find anything. So I was trying.
So you said John Chrysostom testified to
the presence of Ethiopians at the time of Pentecost.
So one thing
So
I know,
he may have been referring to what you said, the Cushites
Kushites.
instead. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I know is that during the medieval period, the Ethiopians, they had a king named Lalibela, which you probably
Yeah.
heard of, and the Muslims, they cut off his access and his people. They barred them from coming to the Holy Land. So this guy built he kind of built his own Holy Land in Ethiopia, with these different churches that
Hmm.
people could take their pilgrimage to, since they couldn't get to the Middle East anymore. So, from that, we know that at least before the time of the Islamic conquest, there were Ethiopians going to Jerusalem at least to make pilgrimages.
Yes. Yes.
And it wouldn't surprise me if there were Ethiopians there at Pentecost, um,
And
because
you're referring to to current day Ethiopians. Is that what you're referring to?
yeah,
Yeah.
because uh, supposedly they all converted to Judaism, or most of them did, right?
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. Yeah.
So
So
they might have been going there for their pilgrimages or to sacrifice at the temple.
yeah. So I wanted to be honest and admit that I couldn't find like further references when I was trying to fact check. But even though I couldn't find them, to be honest with you, even if those weren't there, I think it's. I mean, they have a very ancient history, Ethiopians, and they've always been very devout and very God fearing and religious people. So it wouldn't surprise me, you know what I mean, if they have always been there. And I mean, like King Izana, like Christianity became official religion in Ethiopia in the 300s. I mean, that's not that far from the time of Christ anyway. So, you know,
Might have been safer to be a Christian in Ethiopia than to be a Christian in the Holy Land for a while.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like
definitely. And that,
Diocletian butchering people and
oh man, and that was actually, yeah. And then King Izana, that was the 4th century. That was 300 years before the Persian invasion of in Palestine.
yeah.
So yeah, and where was I at? So it is hard to find a lot when it comes to those early centuries. Um, I did find something that Ethiopian monks actually maintained chapels in Jerusalem during the time of the Crusaders in the 11th century. So they were, and from now on, when I say Ethiopians, I am referring to current day. It's said that there's an Italian pilgrim named Barbone Morsini. He actually went to Jerusalem in the early 1600s and saw that Ethiopians were in possession of various chapels, a grotto, and also an altar in Bethlehem. And so maybe anyone listening is familiar with this, but part of the reason why I wanted to try and do this research is because there's been a lot of conflict, particularly obviously there's been conflict in the Holy Land since the beginning, but specifically when it comes to who owns the Ethiopian monastery on the roof of the Holy Sepulchre. Which is called, I don't know why, honestly, why they haven't changed the name, but to this day they still call it Deir el Sultan, the monastery of the Sultan. I don't know why they wouldn't change it to a Christian name by now, but there's been this back and forth for centuries. Does it belong to the Egyptians, the Copts? Does it belong to the Ethiopians? And what I found is that the Coptic Orthodox Church, and I'm actually Coptic Orthodox myself. The Coptic Orthodox Church holds that the Deir Sultan Monastery was given to them as a gift by the Caliph, or the Caliphate leader Abdel Malik Marwan, in the end of the 7th century, so the 600s, sorry, and they named it Deir el Malik, which means Angel Monastery. But then it was in the 12th century under a Muslim leader Saladin when it was then named Deir Sultan, and it's kept that name ever since then. I'm sure you guys are going to be looking at pictures right now when you're watching this. Some pictures spread out of this particular monastery, but it's on the roof of the Holy Sepulchre and of the particularly the chapel of Saint Helen. And that dome that you see, that dome is actually the roof of the Chapel of St. Helen. So why I say that is because, I mean, as I've said, there's been so much, like the church has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times. I don't know when exactly they built a roof over the dome. I don't know if at some point there was just a dome and then eventually they built the concrete on top. But what I found is that that Deir Sultan monastery, which is on the roof of the Chapel of St. Helen, has literally been there since the 600s at the earliest. That same professor, that Ethiopian professor I was reading in that article, he says the Ethiopians have been in charge of, have possessed that monastery for over 1,000 years. That's what he was saying. And some really crazy stuff happened. Did you guys have any thoughts that you wanted to share, or anything like that before I continue? Or
I just want a point of clarity. So
yeah, sure.
the Ethiopians have a monastery on the roof, but
Yes.
which church owns and runs the services for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre?
Okay, if I'm not mistaken, is the Armenians.
So that would be affiliated with the Eastern.
Yeah, so I guess I'm sure.
Oh wait, what is it? Is it Eastern or Oriental Armenians? I think they might actually be Oriental.
Yeah, Armenian or Oriental Orthodox.
Okay.
But to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure, because there might even be. I apologize for not being more prepared. When I was looking this up, there was so much information. There might even be Armenian Christians there that aren't Orthodox. Maybe, I'm not sure. Within that, like, if you look at the pictures, you can see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's not just one sole building, right? There's a whole bunch of churches and chapels connected. But like it's called the Holy Sepulchre, but there's a lot there. And within that compound, if you want to call it that piece of building, there are different Christian groups possessing different places within that. So on the roof, there's a Church of the Angels, and then there's another church, then you have the Chapel of St. Helen below, then you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, then you have, and each of these are quote unquote owned by different groups. You know what I mean? So you could see how with all of this, how easy it would be to get into conflicts, right? Each person is probably having their own version of history to some degree, at least, right? And it has to do with God, and it has to do with their own people, and it has to do with where the Lord lived and where the Lord died. It's like, it makes sense as to why the Egyptians and the Ethiopians in particular would be continually, pulling back and forth. Because see, this is the thing. In 1654, way after that, right? The Coptic Christians took in a group of Ethiopian monks who lost their Jerusalem church to the Greeks and the Armenians due to not paying taxes. So there was another Ethiopian church in Jerusalem in the 1600s that the Ethiopians lost because of not paying their taxes. And it says that at that time, the Copts were in charge of that monastery on top of the roof, and they allowed them to stay up there for temporary shelter. But then it says that and this was actually on the tour guide site that I found this information. They quote unquote overstayed their welcome, right? But if you go based on just that information, right? Like if you go to the tour guide site, maybe you actually hear a tour guide at the Holy Land itself tell you that. It's like, oh, okay. So, the Coptic Orthodox Christians, the Egyptians, it's always been theirs. And, it wasn't until the 1600s that the Ethiopians, they needed a place to stay, and the Egyptians just let them, sleep up there temporarily, and they never left.
So they stayed on the roof and under like a tent, and then eventually they built like a structure on top of it.
I don't know exactly when the community, because there's actually a community up there as well. Like it's kind of hard to see, but there are actually like monastic cells and like a community where they live up there. It's not, there's actually an actual monastery where they live. It's not just churches and chapels. It's behind the stone, and you can actually, if you look on, there are many YouTube videos of this. We're not going to put it all in the description, but if you look up the Deir Sultan Monastery, you'll see the tour guide show you the roof, show you the dome, and then he'll show you the walkways where you can go into the different places where the Ethiopians lived. I don't know how long that's been there, to be honest, because it's built in the stone, but it's very interesting, and it's I kind of feel bad because I don't want to be giving be so back and forth in this information, but it's kind of hard to find an exact, this is who it's belonged to, this is what it's always been. And what's really crazy this is really, really crazy that I found. So in 1838, hundreds of years after that time, there was a plague that killed every single one of the Ethiopian monks of the Deir Sultan monastery. And guess what they did? The Coptic Christians at the time, with the approval and at that time there was an Egyptian ruler of Jerusalem. So, I mean, maybe you could say the ruler was Egyptian. He probably was, showing love to the Egyptian Christians at the time. They claimed that the plague that killed every single one of these Ethiopians was because of the parchment paper that they had. They said that the plague originated from the parchment. So what they did was they burned all of the Ethiopian books, the documents, and even the materials related to the property, deeds, and rights that the Ethiopians had. So I don't know how accurate that is. I don't know if did they just make that up because they wanted to. I mean, I don't think that and I don't think historians would say this either, that the Egyptians purposely killed the Ethiopians.
No,
but
you know what they probably did is they probably blamed the disease on the paper as an excuse to burn the paper. That would be my guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because even the property, deeds, and rights. So 3 years later, a new group of Ethiopian monks is said to have come and like replace them. I mean, I'm assuming they either came from somewhere else in Jerusalem, that they weren't monks there, or they maybe came from Ethiopia, and they accused the Copts of unfairly appropriating the site for taking it over. And from what I read, this thing in particular, that particular happening in history, is what kind of began this long-term conflict between them. And one could imagine, right, if the deeds and the rights that the Ethiopians had were lost, if all of those books and those writings and all the history, it's like, to put it this way, and I think this is good for people to remember, if anyone who's listening, it's like, it's easy for us to speak because we have Amazon. Like, I literally, it took me a couple days to look up this information, but back then, you don't have Amazon. You want to go travel to another country, even in another city, you're going to go on a journey. You might not even have shoes. You don't have gas stations. You don't have, and even with the Ethiopian or Cushite eunuch, he had a book of Isaiah. The scripture tells us that, but it was rare to have the book of Isaiah. I was surprised to see that he had the book of Isaiah. Like, not everyone had a Bible back then. You know what I mean? So I think it's just worth remembering for us to remember that when they burn those documents, I mean, they're kind of like wiping out history from ever being known ever again. You know what I mean? So, and then as generations progress, and to keep in mind, like, it's easy, especially from the shoes of the Ethiopians, right? I'm sure they would look at the Egyptians like evil people, but I think in the shoes of both, they think they're doing the right thing. They think that they're attributing this place to themselves, right? They've been taught that this is ours, and then they look at the other side as like, oh, these guys are trying to claim something that's not theirs. That conflict might not be there if those documents would have been burned. Wouldn't have been burned,
That's probably why they burned them, man.
Yeah, I mean, God only knows, I guess. And also not only the conflict with the Ethiopians, but with the Armenians. And there are multiple stories that I found of the keys being given and keys being stolen, like to the monastery and to either one or more chapels. Like, there was one occasion where the Egyptians were actually in charge of, like, or quote unquote in possession of the monastery, and then while they were worshiping, the Ethiopians went and took the keys and changed the locks and took it back. So, but yeah, and I'm sure that they had houses before this time, but I read that from the second half of the 19th century in particular, Ethiopians could acquire houses and lands in Jerusalem. So while there's not a whole lot of like very definitive information on Ethiopian Abyssinian presence like all throughout history, while we don't have a lot, it's very clear that they've been there. You know what I mean? And it's very clear that they are an ancient people for sure.
They would have had pilgrims going.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Especially if they were Christian people from so early on.
Yeah,
They would have
yeah.
had some kind of pilgrimage going to the Holy Land. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that they've been there all that time, at least until they got cut off by the Muslims. But
Yeah.
But it sounds like even in that time there was some relationships at least. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and there's actually an account by an Anglican bishop, and I think this was in the middle of the 19th century, around 1855, in the time of Emperor Tewodros of Ethiopia. There's an Anglican bishop who gave an account that Ethiopians were treated like slaves by the Egyptians and the Armenians. So the Ethiopians, and this is actually the account that I was mentioning a moment ago, they couldn't even open their own chapel unless it pleased the Armenians to do so. They suffered at their hands, and there was even an occasion where, probably more, but they had funeral services, and they wouldn't even be able to do them because the Egyptians wouldn't let them. You know, and God only knows what the particular context of. I'm sure each side had their own view as to what was happening, but there's one outsider account of how they were treated badly.
So they've had this. Did you mention it as already, the status quo agreement?
Yeah, he mentioned it.
Yeah, earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, you've heard of that?
So,
You've heard of that?
I saw
no,
it
I
come
was,
up
I
in
was
my
just,
feed.
I'm like doing some research as you're talking.
Oh
So I
yeah.
find
Oh
it very
yeah. Great.
interesting. Yeah.
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 Apparently
No.
that's apparently that's still in place. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know to what degree, right? Because it's different over there, but
But it was an Ottoman decree that, and it's still in place. Yeah.
yeah, and it's strange to me that they still have the name Monastery of the Sultan. I mean, I guess it does keeps there a sense of like connection to history. Um,
Well, I
and
mean, it's like Turkey. You mentioned that you think it's interesting how there was still a lot of Christian activity under Ottoman rule, but that's not uncommon for Sharia law. It's like typically you have to pay the jizya tax as a Christian.
yeah,
Especially in those days, you had a lot of like Christians living in what's nowadays Turkey. Of course, we had the commemoration of the Armenian genocide just
yes,
not that long ago. But before that time, that like it was hard to be a Christian because you had to pay extra taxes and you were like discriminated against from entering certain positions in the government and in the military, etc.
yeah,
And like if a Muslim would have, a Muslim's word would count twice as much as your word. So that, there was like all kinds of risk out there. And anyway, so there were a lot of ways. Like if a church was broken down, you couldn't just build a new one, and the church always had to be like less tall than a mosque. And there's all these rules, but there were still Christians living under Ottoman rule, so it does
yeah,
make sense. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
I almost forgot to mention this. So I found that British authorities, I think it's worth noting, British authorities supported a study in the early 1900s on the history of this issue, of this quarrel between the Egyptians, the Armenians, and the Ethiopians, at least to the time of Caliph Umar in 636, to try and resolve the issue of this conflicting claims to who's in charge. And the British study, it's actually 1925, it concluded that the Abyssinians, the Ethiopian community in Palestine, ought to be considered the only possessor of the Deir Sultan convent or monastery in Jerusalem, with the chapels that are there, and should have free use and exercise of the doors. So that's what I found. I don't know to what degree they did extensive research, but yeah, I mean, British authorities, they looked into it, because it was a few years ago. It reached the news. Like there was, which is it's very unfortunate for any human being to get into a fight with another person, right? But when you see monks doing that, it's like, whoa, something's wrong. Like, so it's definitely, authorities get involved. I think there was an Egyptian monk arrested
Yeah,
because,
I was going to ask you about that. There was an Egyptian monk that was arrested because the Israeli authorities were like the antiquities department was wanting to renovate something inside of his monastery,
wow.
and he didn't want them to be touching. Like I get that, something like that. Like they wanted to do some preservation work on some of the antiquities, but it was Coptic property, like it was their monastery. They didn't want outsiders to tamper with it, basically, something like that.
And one can only imagine. I mean, like thinking about the quarrel again from our shoes, it's like easy for you to say, right? Like we could, we today we could look at the quarrel and be like, oh, that's easy, just show compassion, show forgiveness. But at the same time, it's like, at the same time as these back and forth, it was probably super hot. They didn't have air conditioning. People were getting murdered all over the country. It's just like fill in the blank as far as everything else that was going on. And like, it's very possible, like, especially if like the Ethiopians would say that was the only place that they had to live on top of everything else. I mean, you could, like, we're not perfect, right? You could, like, a very pious Christian could just lose his temper, because of a long buildup of things. So there's a lot to it, I think if we were to go back in time, in a lot of cases at least, things would, oh, okay, we'd understand it better as far as why people did the things that they, not the wickedness, not the evil stuff, right? But but yeah, I mean,
Well, you even had like within the Catholic Church, you had different monasteries. You had, and they would fight with each other over whoever had the right way of like living, and I think it's part of like human nature, unfortunately. So it does make sense that, especially because it's such a holy location, that I feel like it does make, like, I can understand. Of course, it's not not Christian at all, but it is unfortunately very human.
It looks like there's
Yeah,
multiple denominations sharing this complex too. When
yeah,
we
apart from the ancient churches.
well,
yeah. It's a Greek Orthodox, it's a Roman Catholic Church, an Armenian Apostolic Church. Those are the main ones.
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
And then
as
you have
far as
the
possession,
yeah,
three different communions right there.
yeah. Well, what I
and
guess,
they
yeah,
and
I,
they
I
have
was,
some minor communities as well, including the Ethiopian one. So it's
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. So I don't know if they live there. Maybe I spoke too soon, but I was gonna say, aren't there like evangelical, maybe at least presences there?
Just tourists.
Yeah, okay, just tourists. Okay,
Yeah.
the people that actually possess the places are those older Christian communities, I guess. But
Let's
yeah, I mean,
we'll put a list. I'll put a list of all of the different tenants that are in this complex for
I
everybody.
actually saw a post with like Mike Huckabee and his wife, because
wow,
he's based in Jerusalem right now. I guess it's the U.S. ambassador,
hmm.
and it was for Easter, and it was like the tomb, and then it was like a non-evangelical, and it said something like, "Of course, it has to be different than where everybody else thinks
Oh
the
my
tomb
gosh.
is," yeah, because it wasn't the Holy Sepulchre. So yeah,
Yeah, I saw that in the
yeah.
news. I mean, I didn't see Mike Huckabee, but I did see some talk about maybe Jesus was buried in another site, but I haven't looked at it yet.
So I was gonna mention this. I'll go ahead and mention it since you said that. But because it's kind of not really off topic, but so there's a verse that that's used to confirm, because like there are people who say, well, how do we really know that this is the site of the crucifixion and the tomb? Like in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 41, it says, now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So the place where he was crucified there was a garden. So there's a garden near where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a tomb. So the tomb, which turns out to be Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, right, was where he was laid, is near where he was crucified. Well, in doing some research, I found that it actually used to be a quarry, an old quarry, like where Christ was crucified, and over time, the landscape changed. So, looking at it today, and actually also when Christ was crucified, it was outside the walls, but over time they actually extended the. You guys know about that? They extended the length of the walls of Jerusalem to, so now where it's within the walls, but when Christ was crucified, it was outside of the walls. So if you look at it today, like the Holy Sepulchre within the walls, there's no quarry, there's no this and that. It's like, is it really the case? But it's like it's not keeping in mind all of the landscape change that's happened over the centuries. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah.
And then like they're all of the deconstruction and the reconstructions, and like we don't even know what the pagan temples that Hadrian built on top of the tomb looked like either. and how they had to break that down, and I mean, God only knows. So
yeah, one thing I know resolve from my own research is that in the 1st century AD, stone was one of the main things that they made appliances out of, and silverware. Like they made a lot of stuff out of stone in the time that Jesus was on earth. So it wouldn't surprise me, like that at all, that there'd be a stone quarry there. Maybe when they think it's used up all of its usefulness, they just, hey, there's some holes already here, let's just turn them into sepulchres.
Yeah, and there's actually in the Holy Sepulchre, there's actually more than one tomb there within that site. That's not just Christ's tomb that they have as ancient proof. But I just, after them, I just wanted to conclude with just to give them credit and mention because they're connected to the Ethiopian Christian presence, the Ethiopian Jews, as you said, and they're called Beta Israel, or the House of Israel. People may know them by the term Falasha, but it's actually a derogatory term. I think Falasha means the foreigner, I think. But according to oral tradition, they claim to be the descendants of the tribe of Dan. And this claim was actually widely accepted by Israeli, like official Israeli rabbinical institutes in Israel, and then officially, they just officially accepted them as that. So Beta Israel means House of Israel. These Jews in Ethiopia that have been there a long time, and I found a documentary done by a Russian woman who traveled to Ethiopia to get, I think she may have been Jewish herself, to get all this information. She went to the different places where they live. And in an interview with one of the prayer leaders of the synagogue, he said, according to our tradition, we came here after the destruction of the first temple. And that was in 587, 586 BC. They've remained faithful to Judaism even after the country's conversion with King Zana in the 300s. And this is, I mean, kind of unrelated, but this is interesting to know too. Lake Tana is one of the places where there are a lot of Ethiopian Jews today, and Lake Tana is actually the source of the Blue Nile. So the Blue Nile, the White Nile, these rivers that turn into like the Nile that we know today, the Blue Nile's source is in Lake Tana in Ethiopia. And that's actually, it's just something cool to know. That's where a lot of these Ethiopian Jews live. And there are different operations. There are actually secret operations that happened. One of them was in 1984 to 1985. One of them was in 1991. There were other smaller ones where thousands of Ethiopians were actually taken, but by their own will. They wanted to be taken from Ethiopia to Israel. Do you guys know about that?
Well, what is the date? I'm sorry. When did it? When did
the first one, I think, was called Operation Moses, and it was an exodus like an exodus, and on Operation Moses, it was 7,000 to 8,000 Ethiopians
When?
were brought, 1984 to 1985,
Okay.
and it was of these Beta Israel people, of these Ethiopians who say that they're from the tribe of Dan, and they took them by planes. And I think it was in the first Operation Moses. We'll put pictures in the as you're listening to this, huge groups. And in Operation Solomon in 1991, 14,000 Ethiopians were brought from Ethiopia to Israel. There was another one, Operation Joshua, where Ethiopians were brought from Sudan to Israel. And all of these operations were uh, exoduses, like modern day exoduses, to bring Ethiopians who wanted to go back to Israel.
So I get why they would want to leave Sudan if there's any Jews that were there, but
Yeah.
what was the problem with Ethiopia that caused them to feel like they had to leave their country?
I don't know about. I can't speak for anyone personally, but they want to go. They want to go to the Holy Land, I mean, what I think they would call home, and they are. I mean, like I've been trying to say humbly, I'm not an expert of all this stuff, but the man himself said that they believe, the Beta Israel, they believe that they're the descendants of the tribe of Dan, and they say that they came to Ethiopia after the destruction of the first temple. Maybe that sounds like nonsense to an historian, but they think that they used to live in Israel.
That would have
And
been
that
the
they
Babylonians that destroyed the first temple.
Okay, yeah, well,
Solomon's temple. Babylonians destroyed it. The northern kingdom was destroyed first by the Assyrians.
yeah. They say that they're the lost tribe of Dan.
To look into that somewhat.
Yeah, but it's just I just, to whatever degree it's true or not true, I thought it was worth sharing, because it's a huge group of people who are very religious, who keep very ancient ways,
Hmm.
and particularly with those different operations, a lot of people died. A lot of people got misplaced from their families. Uh, some, not just some, actually, a lot of people. I think it was in one of the more recent ones. They met up with family members they haven't seen in decades. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would assume it's probably to some degree due to maybe conditions in Ethiopia, but I think a large part is just because they wanted to go back to what they considered to be home, to Israel, and like a religious home, spiritual home.
So
Yeah, I mean, the same thing happened with a lot of Jews leaving the former Soviet Union. They were also
Okay.
flown in by the thousands. Like, yeah,
Wow.
like even for like I don't know, like I've seen places like they would have graffiti in like Russian
Wow.
in Israel in places, because there's like they would fly them in by like the thousands. And because of that, like I think I don't know like how it's going with the assimilation now, but I did know about that they flew in a lot of Ethiopians, and that there's I've heard some things about discrimination. I
Yeah.
don't know to what extent of like the white Jewish people, I guess, against the Ethiopians. But I would know another reason besides poverty that Ethiopia had in the past, and
Yeah.
I think still has to some degree, is that they've had
Famine.
a lot of wars.
Yeah.
And we did an episode about the Tigray War that happened just a few years ago,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is basically like an echo of like previous civil wars they've had, because they had an emperor there, the Selassie, who was
Yeah. Yeah. That
he
was
was overthrown, and then they were part of the Soviet bloc. Um, where the Tigray people played an important role. But yeah, so there's a lot of and we actually have a lot of refugees here in the Netherlands as well, from both Ethiopia as well as Eritrea,
wow.
which is I think mostly Muslim, but they're still under some kind of military rule anyway, and sometimes they end up fighting each other here in Holland. So yeah,
Wow.
but yeah, could be a reason. But anyway, I don't want to go too far off topic. But
No,
I would probably pick Israel over Ethiopia in the 80s as well. But
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
and really to conclude, I mean, I thought it would be a good idea to obviously anyone who's nice enough to be listening to me and to us right now, of course, you can see many video documentaries and a lot more detailed accounts on this stuff, but a lot of people don't know, you know, and I think what I said was what we talked about is at least enough to get a person thinking, right? I was just blown away, like just even in the first 100 years after Christ, that's a lot. I mean, if you think about living at that time, I mean, what have we? I mean, a lot of us alive today, we never even experienced World War II, but that wasn't that long ago. You know, it's like, man, you know, a lot has happened. And so, if anyone listening to this is ever blessed to go to the Holy Land, I've never been there myself. I think it's good for us to get rather than just go, like learn a lot about it first. It's like when you read the Bible, like what helps a person to appreciate the Bible is to learn about the Bible first and to hear people talk about, you know, obviously in a good light about the Bible. And then when you approach the Bible, like prayerfully, you come to it with this awe and with this knowledge about it that can help you appreciate it, right? The same thing with the Holy Land. It's like if you just go to the Holy Land having no idea about what it is, that would be a different experience than knowing all this history. Because when you go there, you're going to be like, I remember when I was a cashier a long time ago, this guy came to my register, and him and another customer started a conversation with me, and they both told me how when you step foot, like they even said when you just get off the plane when you go over there, it just feels different over there. And I would think that that's probably to some degree the case because they have such a knowledge, you know. It's like they have an appreciation for it, they know about it, they've studied it, they also believe, right? And knowing all of that stuff, when you go over there, it's just different, you know. So I just wanted to, I thought these would be good topics, you know. If you go to if you go to Jerusalem today, I saw another video on YouTube about this. Right next to an Iranian like food market, like of food from Iran, literally like 2 feet next to it was Ethiopian food and an Ethiopian market, right? So you go to the Holy Land and there's all these cultures and countries together, you know, and the Ethiopians in particular, which I've been talking about, are one of those groups, you know, that they deserve to be recognized. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
So,
for sure. They
yeah.
I think they're one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, and they're so strong. They've defended the faith, and you know, under immense pressure, like for Islamic pressure, but later on also from the socialists. So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of respect for them.
Yeah,
So
Mussolini. I mean, Haile Selassie was he went to exile in Britain for like 4.5 years, but he ended up reclaiming the throne. And Mussolini in Italy, they didn't. It wasn't a permanent, you know, takeover of Ethiopia, thankfully. So
Martin
yeah, no, I
Luther,
as a
really,
whole,
he believed that the Ethiopians were the first church among Gentiles, like the first established Gentile church.
well, who said that?
Martin Luther, yeah,
Wow.
which is why he sat with one of their theologians for a while, and we used to be in communion with them back during well, I guess you wouldn't call it the Middle Ages because it's the end of the Middle Ages, but yeah,
Wow.
it's interesting. I mean, for sure, they're a very old community. I don't know if they're the first Gentiles to become Christian on a large scale, but I'm sure
Well,
it's like, if not like the first, close to it, because if they were already believing in Judaism,
yeah.
then that's just like the next. That's just like a stone's throw away from Christianity. Like they would have already had all of the Old Testament prophecies and customs, which prefigure the communion.
Yeah,
So
and King Izana, Ethiopia officially becoming a Christian country in the 4th century. This is the 300s, like, and this is like obviously not to say this thinking like, oh, so they're better than they're better than them, or we're better than them, or they're better than us, or but I mean, it's just, I think it's worth noting for like Western Christians, or I don't know, even just Christians who just don't know a lot about history, right? To just keep in mind that like, how long has America been around, right? How long has it been around?
Yeah.
And then Christianity has been alive in Ethiopia since the 300s, 1700 years. It's still going. Christianity's been alive there.
They've got books in their libraries that are older than our country. And there's monks that will go there and read those books. And I wish I could. There was somebody on YouTube who I saw, he went to Ethiopia to study. I think he was actually searching for the Ark of the Covenant, but they took him
Multiple
into
people have.
Yeah, they took him into this ancient library that you can't even get to unless it's like high up, I think on the top of some kind of really steep cliff or something like that.
Yeah.
And the only way you can get into it is if they lower the ladder down to you.
It's a monastery up there where they live up there.
Oh, so you've seen that one?
Yeah. They've seen a lot of them, like in full length. There's there's multiple locations where they have those books. There's not just like one sole book, but
Yeah,
it's just worth mentioning because like I mean, a lot of times this is said by people who they're already preaching some kind of false ideas anyway, but they're like Christianity is a Western religion. It's like, dude,
Nope.
Christianity was started. It's not a Western, like, you know, that's
for
that's a whole other
everybody.
conversation.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about Christianity. It's for everybody. Yeah,
yes, it's universal.
Yeah, it's supposed to bring everybody together. And yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, anyway.
You know, when you go,
it was spread eastward. It was spread. Yeah, it was spread to India. You know, in the early days, it was spread to you know, all throughout the Roman Empire. Northern Africa was Christian. You know, so yeah, I mean, lots of people were. Yeah, but the early Christians, yeah, of course, the Ethiopians,
Syrians,
and not just
Christians,
Syrians,
Greeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just reading about I have this documentary about the Megiddo mosaic. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, and briefly.
Yeah, I was just there. I started watching the documentary. I didn't get to finish it, but it's like this early church, which is I was looking it up, like, 'cause it's around Hadrian's time, but it's like after. But I was like in the year 230 AD.
Wow.
But yeah. Anyway,
is that mosaic church that I saw pop?
Yeah, that says Jesus is God. Basically, it's like a Greek mosaic, and they found it.
It's called Mosaic Church, right? The documentary.
Could be. Yeah.
This is I wanted to say this too really quick before we conclude, but this is just really, really interesting and like amazing, something amazing that happened in history in relation to all this stuff that a lot of people don't know about. But I talk about this on my channel, A New Resolve. But Haile Selassie, who was the king of Ethiopia, he was born in 1892, and he's crowned king in I think technically 1928, but officially 1930. And dignitaries from around the world came to Ethiopia to his coronation ceremony, his crowning ceremony. He was king from 1930 to 1975. A Marxist regime killed him and many Ethiopians, and that was the end of the Solomonic dynasty. But why I wanted to mention him really quick is because when Haile Selassie was crowned King of Kings of Ethiopia, that's their title for kings. Obviously, he's not the King of Kings in the Book of Revelation, but when he was crowned king, at that time, the Ethiopian Christians were still called Coptic Christians. Like if you go on, if you guys are familiar with Etsy, I think if that's what it's called, ETSY, it's kind of like an eBay website where people sell stuff that they make. If you go on eBay today, if you maybe even go on Google Images, if you search Coptic, COPTIC crosses, usually what comes up are Ethiopian crosses, but they're titled Egyptian for some reason. And why that is, it's because for the longest time, all the way up until Haile Selassie, the Ethiopian church didn't have autocephaly. So autocephaly is like, you have the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Syrian, the Indian, like they're all, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church now. But it literally wasn't from all the way from way back then to when Christianity first came into Ethiopia, all the way until Haile Selassie, that they were a part of the Egyptian church. And when Haile Selassie was crowned king in the ceremony, this is the only time this has ever been recorded on camera and in history. And I don't even know if it's ever even happened. I don't know if they did this with the previous kings, but there's a video. You can see the video on YouTube. It's kind of blurry, but Haile Selassie is crowned king of all of Ethiopia, and the ceremony is done within a Coptic Egyptian Orthodox Christian mass, like a liturgy, a church mass. It's so fascinating to watch. I just wanted to say that to anybody listening, because it's a very, very real and like profound, like it just shows you how interconnected Egypt and Ethiopia are in history. Yeah,
I've only been to the Coptic church a few times.
Yeah.
Like a handful of times, but the story of the connection between the Ethiopian church and the Egyptian Coptic church was mentioned like the second time I went.
Yeah,
I think they mentioned something about it was like somebody like shipwrecking, I guess.
Maybe Frumentius or one of those guys.
Yeah, Frumentius. Yeah, and he brought the faith according to Coptic tradition, I think.
That was at the time of Saint Athanasius.
Yeah,
I think
okay,
I think Saint Athanasius. He was if I'm not mistaken, he was the patriarch of Alexandria of Egypt at that time. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Frumentius tried to talk to make the bridge to get the approval or whatever of Athanasius for the Ethiopians to be a part of them, something like that. But yeah, it's amazing to me, man. And if you go to any, I mean, as soon as I say this, maybe you'll go to one and you won't see them, but it's like pretty much any Egyptian church you go to in America, there are going to be a couple Ethiopians there. Like this morning today, I went to an Egyptian church today, and there are probably, I'm not exaggerating, like 15 Ethiopians there. So that's because of that history,
They're in communion anyways with each other.
Yeah, and they're in communion. So
they can pop in and go to each other's churches without any problem, unless there's like a language barrier issue. I think it's basically the same theology.
Yeah, but that's it. Thank you guys for letting me share that information. I thought it was worth sharing. So
yeah, great, man. Good one.
Yeah, good story. Appreciate it.
For sure.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, unus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.